In recent weeks, we've been humbled by many calls from colleagues who are in the midst of dramatic change brought about by COVID-19. In most cases, they're looking to make rapid changes to the way they deploy learning. And at the same time, they're also facing dramatic economic uncertainty. Budgets are in peril, confusion is sky high, time is of the essence. So, questions about measuring the effectiveness of learning are coming up regularly. But how do we show that impact? What does that impact look like? These questions really get to the heart of L&D's role as a contributor to the organization, as an integral part of the changing of our coworkers' behaviors. Notice I said part, because the conversation almost always starts with the idea of impact, right? We exist to teach people how to change behaviors. We want to know that the knowledge, skills, and ability that we're passing on are changing the organization. We want to be able to point to a quantifiable difference in behaviors and a measurable difference in performance and say that exists because of my work. And that's not an unwise desire. Certainly anything we undertake as learning professionals should be rooted in measurable, actionable business goals. But learning and performance are not the same thing. So if you've been in this industry for any amount of time, you are painfully aware that learning is a contributor to behavioral change, not the cause. Simply because we know how to change a behavior doesn't ensure that we will change that behavior. So in America alone, we spend hundreds of billions of dollars every year on books and educational seminars and videos and coaching for topics like health and weight loss, personal finance, and overall self-improvement. If the learning was the only requirement to change our behaviors, those expenditures would have created the healthiest, wealthiest, and wisest nation on the planet. But the reality is, we continue to struggle with these things because learning and performance are not the same thing. They are not inextricably linked. They're not measured the same way. They're not always analyzed the same way. They're not interchangeable. Because they learned doesn't guarantee they can do. And because they can do doesn't automatically mean they learned from you. And yet we keep going back to this same well over and over. So at this critical time, it's really important that we understand and separate those two concepts. If there's one point you should be starting from in an attempt to show your value, it's this one. You should understand that we first measure what we're responsible for, did they learn, and then we can measure what we contribute to, did it have an impact. And more importantly, we can't conflate those two things. The truth is, we've been so mystified and confused and in some ways misled about how to effectively assess did they learn, that at some point it just became easier to assume that assessments were a waste of time. And so we relied on metrics that showed other information. Things like, did they attend learning? It became easier to assume that if they completed some kind of training, we would see a change in behaviors and an impact to the organization. It was a simple correlation. Something learning related happened, and it correlated to this change. Therefore, learning had an impact. Now, sure, the logic behind that seemed flawed. I'm sure it didn't work out in our favor very often. But in the absence of knowing how to show did they learn, it was all we had. Now, don't get me wrong. There have been models in place for decades to teach us how to assess learning effectively. Recent models, which we're going to discuss in more detail over the next couple of weeks, do an even better job of providing very practical and very prescriptive guidance around how to assess learning and training. And to truly answer that question to the organization, did they learn? Because it's not enough to just answer, did they attend training? Attendance doesn't mean that someone learned. It's not enough to answer, did they access a lot of content? Or were they engaged with the content? Engagement and access don't mean that someone learned. And It's not enough to just throw a random quiz at the end of a course and say that because the learners passed based on some arbitrary threshold that we defined, usually out of thin air, that learning occurred. Completion of unreliable or invalid assessments doesn't mean that someone learned. But that doesn't make assessments bad. As I've said many times before, assessments are not bad. We just do them badly. And so it's important to know that there are valid and reliable ways to statistically show that learning has occurred, because that's our responsibility. That's what we want to focus on, just to help people get up to speed quickly. So over the next few weeks, as we're all working from home and socially distancing, we're going to share some information with you on how to assess your learning and answer that question, did they learn? We'll talk about how to design and develop effective assessments, how to think beyond easy quizzes tacked on at the end of a course, how to consider what you're trying to assess and identifying the best way to measure it, about when to assess learning and what assessments at different times mean when we're trying to show did they learn. And we'll help identify some of the pitfalls that will make your learning statistics a little less valid, less reliable. But the important starting point is to remember that we assess learning to answer the question, did they learn, in a statistically reliable way. That is our responsibility. That is what we can control as an L&D organization. Once we've showed that they did indeed learn, then we can take those learning metrics. We can correlate them against behavioral metrics, performance metrics, or impact metrics. But it's essential that we understand that the difference between what we can take responsibility for and what we can contribute to are different. We measure each of these accordingly and effectively. So keep checking back because we'll be sharing more about this over the next couple weeks. If you have any urgent needs, please feel free to drop us an email, give us a call. We'll be glad to talk you through any situations you're currently encountering. But in the meantime, stay safe, stay healthy, keep a safe social distance, wash your hands, don't touch your face, which I've probably done numerous times during these 2 minutes, and by all means, keep learning. Thank you.